And welcome back. Today we're going to take a moment to look at how we can use selection tools in order to help improve our ability to quickly manipulate images. For example, ones that we may have already created. So I'm going to go ahead and look at our 4 images that we had used last time. And I'm going to go ahead and choose to use the sword image here to demonstrate today's lesson. So the first thing I want to do is I want to go ahead and make a copy of this. I want to save a copy because I don't want to necessarily change the original. And I can call this sword copy, that's fine. And now of course I have a copy of it, but you notice I'm still on the original. So I want to make sure I go ahead and open that copy that I just made. So sword copy, there it is. Control 0 to zoom it in. And now I don't have to worry about anything I do to this original image is not going to be affected. So I can still have access to this image here. So what I want to show you to start off is let's refamiliarize ourselves with things like the marquee tool. Remember, the marquee tool allows us to make like a rectangular selection, so it allows us to easily grab that. We also have the option for elliptical selections. So if I use the elliptical tool, it will make a circular selection. There's also, of course, you can do single row, single column. So if I want to, for example, grab a row of pixels, for example, I have that option to do so. It allows me to just grab that entire row of pixels really quickly. But where I want to show it also is the lasso tool, because we may have talked about the lasso tool before, but now we're going to go ahead and revisit that a little more in depth. So with the lasso tool, if I select a circle, I can just draw any kind of free shape, and it will go ahead and try to make that selection the best that it can without pixels that it's bound to. Now there is something I do want to show with the lasso tool and a couple of other tools that you might see when you're working with selection that can make a difference in your pixel art. So for example, since I'm on lasso tool, let's go to our sword here. And I'm just going to go ahead and start here in the gray area that I have here. I'm going to go ahead and draw, and I'm going to go through these this black fuller that I have here. Let go, and you can see it has reached around that section there. All right, cool. Now I want to, of course, go here and do the same thing, but I'm going to go ahead and uncheck anti-alias. So this is not checked, and I deselected it just by clicking off that selection. And I'm going to go ahead and click again and try to do the same thing. I'm going to try to go right through the middle of these black dots here, complete the line. And you can see it has, again, tried to do that. Now, the reason why we may want to adjust this anti-aliasing is if you remember when we did things like our paint bucket and we had anti-alias on there, it would, of course, have the option of sometimes sneaking through those pixels. With anti-alias off, it is very much more explicit. So that is something that we can easily do here. So again, with the lasso tool with the anti-alias off, it keeps it a lot more explicit to just those pixels. It's not necessarily going to go and select something outside of that zone. There's also this feather option here. I just want to go ahead and turn that feather option on. Let's go ahead and make that 5 pixels just so we have something to see. And if I go ahead and do that same selection, all right, now it says no more than 50% selected, selection edges will not be visible, and it's because of the selection that we made. Okay, now of course we have something here. What a feathering does, effectively kind of gives you a buffer. All right, it's not something you may not have to worry about too much, but it's just something I wanted to point out here. All right, let's go ahead and deselect this. Let's show one more thing with our selection tool here, and then we're going to use it to actually manipulate this shape here, and that is the ability of inversion. Now, inversion is a very powerful thing. So, for example, I want to maybe grab this whole sword here. All right, maybe I just want to start by kind of tracing around with my lasso tool the sword, and I'm just going to try to do roughly a good job here. Doesn't have to be precise. And when I let go, you can see it's grabbed pretty much most of that sword. And I can, of course, add to that selection quite easily. If I come over here and go down to the quick selection option, I also have magic wand. These are things that you can use to kind of add to that. So I'm going to use a quick selection here. I'm just going to decrease this brush size just so it can come in and kind of add individual pixels. You can see I can, of course, use that as well to do selection. And I can add to that selection really easily. Unlike with the lasso tool, it's kind of like one selection done. With this quick selection, it is pretty smart about being able to grab a lot of these different things here. Now the thing is, right now it has the entire sword selected. All right, but what if I wanted to not do the sword? What's if I wanted to change the background? All right, and let's just say there's other things here in this background theoretically. Right now we know there's not just a solid background color, but for the purpose of our demonstration here, we'll just pretend something is back here. If I go ahead and select on select and then inverse, it may not look like much has changed. However, if you look along the border of the image, you can see now that that border is now highlighted. It's now got that kind of nice little effect from Photoshop there that says, hey, there's a selection here. And if I hit that select inverse again, you can see that that is no longer there. It's back to being just the sword. And what that does, it allows us to simply make the selection of just this zone. So I'm going to go ahead and inverse that again. And let's just go ahead and grab, for example, our brush tool. All right, just to kind of show you this real quick. All right, if I take my brush tool, and I got this nice bright green here, so it should be pretty obvious. And I'm just going to make a straight stroke across. You can see that it did not do the sword, and that's because the sword is not in that selection. If it was in that selection, then we would have had that green line go across the sword as well. So right now, it is pretty much saying, hey, you can do anything that you want inside of the area that's selected, but this area is deselected. It's not an option available for us to edit. I'm just going to Control Z to get rid of that green line. And let's go ahead now and kind of apply some of that to our sword here. All right, so let's say we want to take this sword and make it into more of a silhouette. It's just kind of a shadowed effect. So first thing we do, I'm going to go take this background here. Instead of being a blue, maybe I want to make it something that's a more kind of evoking of a shadow. So maybe I want like a darker blue. So I'm just going to go ahead and do that. I'm going to use my bucket tool, fill that in. There we go. That's a nice dark color. Or maybe not quite that dark. That's a little bit better. And let's go ahead and manipulate the sword. Now, if I try clicking on it right now, nothing's going to happen. All right, but if I go ahead and hit select and then inverse, my selection is now upon that sword. Now, I can very easily, for example, grab that paint bucket tool, choose a color that might be, let's say, something like orange, just so we can see it here, and click on it. You can see we can change it. But what we want to do here now is kind of make it more like a silhouette, kind of more of a shadow effect. And so in order for us to do that, we're actually first just going to go ahead and take this whole selection here, and let's go ahead and clear it out. Now, of course, we can try going Edit and Clear, and you can see it erased everything that was inside of that selection there. So that whole sword is now gone, right? So we could easily come here, pick a color, fill it in, and we'd have something. And I could, of course, turn on anti-aliasing, but in this case, it's not really going to make a difference when I go to do that because, again, we're not looking to cross into different pixel zones. We're having a selection kind of inhibit where that is going. So what I'm actually going to do here is I need to go ahead and make it so we can kind of have some fading effect on it. Now, I could, of course, do things like I could use gradients, for example. I could use the brush tool even to come in here and paint through some of this to kind of get some of that fade effect. But maybe I want to do something a little different. So what we need to do is a combination of different techniques in order to kind of invoke a kind of a shadow effect here. So let's go ahead and pick kind of a dark gray here to start. And so, of course, now we have this sword filled in. I can, of course, if you ever find anything that's not quite, it looks like we had missed a couple pixels here that might actually be belonging to actually this background here, it looks like. So I'm just going to go ahead and fill those in there. So now I want to go ahead and fill this in, but I want it to be more of a gradient. Now, if you notice, I did inadvertently deselect this. I can always go ahead and click on that again to grab my selection back. There it is. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to actually grab the brush tool. Now we currently have this gray selected as a color. And what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to increase the brush size so it's quite large here. And I'm going to go ahead and just kind of paint over this in relative strokes. Oops, I didn't change my color back. That's okay. Control Z. Go ahead and select that. Now that's my primary color. And now if I try stroking over this, you can see nothing much is changing because we still have the same color. So let's go ahead and change that to more of a lighter tone. And if I paint over this, we can see it does paint, but it's quite significant. It's because we are still on a hard brush. Let's make it more of a soft brush here, just to kind of give some more of that softer tone. And you can see it's quite large, so I'm going to Control Z, bring my brush size down a little bit, and maybe paint over that a little bit. And you can see how we can kind of get more of a gradual effect kind of going on here. maybe that's a little too light. I can always back that up. I can say, maybe I want a darker gray. I can do a darker gray too, and just make a couple small passes here to kind of lighten that up and make sure it's nice and light there. And I can always come back to a darker color and add some darker colors on the pass through. So this is how we can make a quick and easy silhouette of our shape just by using selection tools. And again, these are all very powerful things that we can use within our artwork that we can use to really make and enhance what we've been doing.